Good afternoon and welcome to the City Club of Cleveland. I'm Hugh McKay, President of the Board of Directors of the City Club. Cleveland has a proud tradition as a great law town, including our fine local law schools, which have produced some of the nation's greatest lawyers. And we in Cleveland can be especially proud that one of the true heroes of American law came to Cleveland from Alabama to earn his law degree. Today's speaker, Fred D. Gray, Sr., could not attend the University of Alabama Law School, his home state, because of its segregationist policies. So in 1951, he ventured north to attend Western Reserve Law School, now Case Western Reserve Law School, where he received his law degree in 1954. And he notes what an outstanding education it was. Mr. Gray passed the Ohio bar, but he returned to Alabama on a mission, as he has written in his autobiography, quote, to destroy everything segregated I could find, unquote. And the rest, as they say, is history. Indeed, Fred Gray's career has been truly historical. In September of 1954, he opened private practice in Montgomery, Alabama, and the next year a woman named Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on a Montgomery bus to a white passenger. The bus driver had her arrested, and Ms. Parks retained Mr. Gray. He then helped launch the Montgomery Improvement Association, and a very young Martin Luther King Jr. was wisely chosen as its spokesperson. The case of Rosa Parks, led by Mr. Gray, became the rallying point of the historic 381-day boycott in Montgomery to end the practice of segregation on the city's buses. During the Montgomery boycott and thereafter, Mr. Gray also represented Dr. Martin Luther King. Mr. Gray famously also represented those who, on a bloody Sunday in March 1965, walked toward the Edmund Pettus Bridge. Mr. Gray went on in his career to lead the litigation desegregating Alabama's public schools, including the same University of Alabama Law School he had been barred from attending. Mr. Gray later successfully litigated the landmark Tuskegee syphilis cases, bringing suit against the U.S. government on behalf of African American participants in a notorious and shameful public health study, and had many other major litigation victories. Beyond his storied law practice, Mr. Gray has served as president of the National Bar Association and has received numerous awards and honors, including the Martin Luther King Jr. Drum Majors Award from the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, the National Bar Association C. Francis Stadford Award, the Spirit of Excellence Award from the American Bar Association, and many others. Currently, he's the senior partner at the Montgomery law firm of Gray, Langford, Sapp, McGowan, Gray, and Nathanson. There's a trend there. Mr. Gray is the author of 2 books, including his autobiography, Bus Ride to Justice. Suffice to say, Mr. Gray has been at the forefront of changing the social fabric of America regarding desegregation, integration, constitutional law, racial discrimination in voting, housing, education, jury service, farm subsidies, medicine and ethics, and generally in improving our legal system and our society at large. Please welcome to the City Club, Fred D. Gray, Sr.
Thank you very much. I appreciate those kind remarks, and it is always good to be back in Cleveland. Having come to this city some 60 years ago now. But it is good to be back. It's good to be at the City Club of Cleveland. I'm delighted that my client, Mrs. Parks, has been a speaker here among many of your distinguished speakers. And John Lewis, who I had the privilege of representing. And there are some of you who remember I had a brother, Tom Gray, who practiced law here for some 30 or more years, who we lost a couple of months ago. And then after I lost my first wife some 12 years ago, I met a young lady from Cleveland. And 10 years ago, I married her, Carol Porter. she and her first husband, whom she had lost suddenly, owned a series of dry cleaners. Here, the satellite cleaners, and she owned one at 79th and Wade Park. So I do have, in addition to having graduated from law school here, some ties in Cleveland, and it's always good to be back. It is also good to have read and have been introduced to this club, and to know of the outstanding work that it has done for almost 100 years in giving an opportunity for persons of different ethnic backgrounds and beliefs to express their opinions and to educate the public generally on those matters. Little did I realize, as I indicated last night in a lecture on campus, that when I was a student here that I would be invited back to speak. And many people ask me two or three things, and I think it may be the basis for what we're going to talk about as we talk about the road to justice. And justice is one of those things, it's a long road toward it, and I'm not sure whether we'll ever get there, but we certainly will have to continue to try. But I'm frequently asked, how did you happen to represent Rosa Parks? How did you happen to represent Dr. King? How did you happen to represent these various and sundry persons? And I found that it's easier for me to just tell people that I'm not a person who always wanted to be a lawyer. I was born in Montgomery, Alabama, in the heart of the Depression in 1930. Everything was completely segregated. And up until I came to law school here, all of my background was that. And as I was growing up as a teenager, like these young people who are here today, and it's certainly good to see them here, and I want them to know that young people have played a major role in the civil rights movement, and we're going to talk about that a little bit. And just as those persons played major roles, you too can play a major role. But the basic opportunity of professions that African Americans in the 40s, males would usually go into were either one of two things. Either a what? A preacher, or a what? Or a teacher. And you did both of those on a segregated basis because the churches were segregated, the schools were segregated. And I decided I was going to be both. After going to one of our church schools in Nashville, I came back home having finished high school and was going to be a teacher, so I went to Alabama State College. It was then Alabama State College for Negroes, the historical black school in Montgomery. And I lived on the west side. The school was on the east side. I worked for the newspaper downtown. We didn't have automobiles in those days. We used public transportation system. And as I used the public transportation from as little system as little as twice a day to as much as 8 times a day, I realized how unfairly our people were being treated and how we had to sometimes pay our money in the front, go to the back to get in the bus, and then if white persons came on, we had to get up and give our seats. And one person was even killed as a result of an altercation that occurred on the bus. I also realized then that everything in Montgomery was completely segregated. And I made a secret commitment. And that commitment was very simple. At that time, if a person of color even had a cause of action against a white person, I don't care how meritorious it was, you would have very little chance of even getting a lawyer to handle your case. So I decided that I was going to finish college, go to somebody's law school, and in those days, all of the southern states had a procedure set up where if the course was offered at the white university and not offered at the black college in the state, they would pay a portion of your tuition, room, and board to go anywhere you could get admitted, just since you didn't go to that University of Alabama or Auburn in those days. So I decided I was going to go to law school, finish law school, pass the bar exam, come back to Alabama, and destroy everything segregated I could find. Now, for a teenager to even think that way in the 40s was thinking outside the box. I finished state in May of '51, was enrolled in Case Western Reserve University Law School in September of '51, finished in 3 years, decided to stop by Columbus just in case and took the Ohio bar exam in June of '54. And in July of '54, I took the Alabama bar and was informed in the latter part of August that I had passed both the first time. I am now ready to begin to do what I had planned to do. So whatever I have been able to do in the civil rights movement, and I don't stand here today to tell you that I did it all by myself, because I did not. But what I have been able to do was planned, and I had enough sense and had an advisor and a professor at the law school, Professor Sonfield, who tried to convince me to stay in Cleveland. He thought I could develop into a good lawyer, but they wouldn't give me an opportunity in Alabama. And I thanked him for wanting to encourage me to stay in Cleveland, but I said, the only reason I came, Professor, is to go back to Alabama. Didn't tell him what I was going to do other than practice law. But he says, well, Fred, when you go back, don't fail to get an older lawyer who has more experience than you and share a fee with him in any cases you have. And I've done that. What did I do? Well, I knew Mrs. Parks and had known Mrs. Parks since my college days. She lived only a couple of blocks from the church that I attended. E.D. Nixon, Mr. Civil Rights, was her very best friend in the civil rights movement and who had been very active in civil rights. And his wife was a member of the same church that I was a member of. So everybody in Montgomery, for that most part, knew each other. A relatively small community. And we all knew that we had problems on the buses. But once I became a member of the bar, my first case was not Rosa Parks' case. It wasn't John Lewis's case. It wasn't the Selma to Montgomery March case. But young people, it was a 15-year-old girl named Claudette Carvin who lived in the northeastern part of the city of Montgomery and who had to take the public transportation to go downtown, transfer to another bus to go to the black high school. And there was this community was a small black community surrounded by whites. So it wasn't too many of them, and that's why they didn't have a bus that went out there for them just to take them to school. Claudette had used and had been on the bus as she had many, many times before. But on the 2nd of March, 1955, there were more white people who got on that bus as she was going home than usual. She sat in a seat she'd sat in before. But what finally happened is the driver, when white people came on, asked her to move, and Claudette wouldn't move. She hadn't planned to do it. She knew she had paid her money, and she told him, I'm in the seat I've sat in before. I ride this bus 5 days a week. Called the police, arrested her, and she did what any teenager does when they get in trouble. She called her mother, who called E.D. Nixon, Mr. Civil Rights, who called Fred Gray, and I represented Claudette. But the same persons who 9 months later came to Rosa Parks' rescue came to Claudette's rescue. Joanne Robinson, who taught at Alabama State and who had had a problem on a bus herself in 1949. E.D. Nixon, Mr. Civil Rights. Rosa Parks, who was secretary of the branch and also in charge of the youth program. And Claudette had attended some of her youth sessions. I raised the issue that they were really not concerned about Claudette being a delinquent minor, but rather they were interested in enforcing the segregation laws. Judge Hill did not listen to me. We complained to the city officials, Joanne Robinson and others along with myself. We threatened to have a bus boycott, but we didn't. But what we did do was we began to keep, the Women's Political Council began to keep a record of all the incidents that occurred on the buses. And the idea was that whenever the opportunity presents itself, we will be ready. Mrs. Parks and I had developed a very close personal friendship because she worked a block and a half from where my office was. And 5 days a week she would come to my office since I opened it. And for over a year we talked about the problems of the buses and all these other problems that we had. And even on the day of her arrest we had talked about what should take place. And she knew that I was going to be out of town that afternoon. But she also knew, unlike Claudette Carvin, Claudette didn't know what was going to happen to her, but Mrs. Parks had been trained and instructed and knew what to do if anything happened. When the opportunity presented itself on December 1st, Ms. Parks refused to give up her seat. When I got back in town and had phone calls from her and went over and talked with her, she indicated she wanted me to represent her. And we ended up, after leaving her house, talking to Mr. E.D. Nixon, who was Mr. Civil Rights, leaving her house, going and talking to Joanne Robinson, who had the problems on the buses earlier and who had the records and who had complained to the bus company. We concluded and made plans in her house on the night of December 1st and December 2nd that ultimately resulted in Dr. King being selected to be the spokesman for the group at a time and at a meeting that he did not attend. The other two leaders, E.D. Nixon was treasurer. He was elected treasurer because he knew A. Philip Randolph. He was a Pullman car porter, and A. Philip Randolph was his president and was able to raise funds for it. Rufus Lewis was the other black leader in the city. His wife owned half interest in the largest funeral home in town, and we needed cars to transport people. And Fred Gray, the young lawyer, just out of law school about a year, was supposed to do the legal work. When the chips were down, when everything was settled, those were the officers. And on that Monday morning, when we tried Mrs. Parks' case and black people stayed off of the buses, and that Monday evening, Dr. King was introduced to the Montgomery community, to the state of Alabama, to the nation, and to the world. And the rest is history. Now, we've come a long way from that period of time. But let me just tell you that if there had been no Claudette Carvin, young people, who did what she did on March the 2nd, 1955, because she gave Joanne Robinson, Rosa Parks, Fred Gray, Dr. King, and the other 50,000 African Americans in Montgomery the courage to do what we did. If Claudette had not done what she did, we may never, and Mrs. Parks may never have done what she did on December the 1st. If Mrs. Parks had not done what she did in refusing to give up her seat on December 1st, there would have been no bus boycott. There would have been no meeting at Hope Street Baptist Church. The nation would not have been introduced to Dr. King at that time, and the whole history of the civil rights movement may have been different. And I want you young people to know that the person who gave us the moral courage to do it was a 15-year-old girl, and let's give her a hand. I'm not going to talk about all these cases that we've handled. You can read about those. But what I want you to know that we were able, and the civil rights movement didn't just happen. There were people who sat down, who planned, who worked together. I got on the phone as soon as the people told me about I was going to have the responsibility of getting together a legal team, called Thurgood Marshall, went to New York and talked with Robert Carter, and established a relationship where they could give to us the legal support that we needed. So the civil rights movement has come a long way. But there were several events that occurred. One, my passing the bar. Two, Dr. King coming to Montgomery. Three, Claudette Carvin doing what she did. Four, Dr. King becoming pastor of Dexter Avenue Baptist Church. Five, Judge Johnson becoming the federal district judge who decided our cases, and Rosa Parks doing what she did, and the filing of Browder versus Gale. When you put all those things together, you were able to have a civil rights movement. And I believe that what we did and what others did in the civil rights movement, including what the students did at AT&T in starting the sit-ins, has resulted in the fact that we now have a president of color who is now in the White House. And a part of that is because of what happened here. Let me hasten and say, because I know my time is about up, what I want you to know is that we don't have the same type of Supreme Court in Washington that we had during the Warren administration. Notwithstanding the progress we've made, we are now at a point where if we are not careful, we could lose some of the gains that we've made. And if anything I have said to you today, if it means anything, it means that the struggle for equal justice continues. And while I would like to be able to tell you that things are all rosy, and there are some people who think that because we have the person who now occupies the White House there, that all our problems have been solved. But I want you to know that all the problems that we have had over the years, while we've been able to move the law, we have not been able to complete the job. So I say to you today that the struggle has not ended. Racial discrimination in this country has not ended. We do not have a level playing field. There is no such thing as a race-neutral society in America. The consequences of over 350 years of slavery, segregation, and discrimination has not disappeared during the last 50 years. Unfortunately, we still live in a country where race still plays, unfortunately, a predominant part. I don't have time today to do it, but I ask you to go and read the National Urban League report. And they produce a report every year to the president on the status of conditions. But that report in 2009 and it's a very bad report. And if you think things are well, you go and read it. The 2009 report also states that African Americans are twice as likely as whites to be unemployed, 3 times more likely than whites to live in poverty, and more than 16 times as likely to be incarcerated. As well as the 2010 report tells us that the conditions of African American today, we are in a worse position than we were in some instances earlier. Now, what does all of that mean to us as we sit here at the City Club of Cleveland? What I want to tell you is that while we still have some serious racial problems, I think we need to do about 4 things. 1, we need to recognize that while we have made a tremendous amount of progress, the struggle continues, and racism still, in many instances, predominates what is happening. Secondly, it's not going to go away by itself. The only way we had a civil rights movement, we were able to go and to make plans. So you need to come up with a plan. If we're going to ever do away with racism here, we're going to have a plan to do it. And once you have a plan, you're going to have to execute that plan. And in executing the plan, you're going to have to include yourself. Most of us want all our problems to be solved, but we want somebody else to solve the problems. What I say to you today, and what I say to young people as I look at them and think about them, we must show, as we grow and as we develop, and as we pass our mantle on to these young people, we need to equip them, because the challenges that these young people include are challenges of racism, economics and political disenfranchisement, the lack of adequate health care, human indignity in public schools and schools of higher learning. We still have serious problems. Our challenge before us today is to leave here today more committed than we have ever been to help our young people so that they will see that there is hope, that they will have a better life than their parents had. And that challenge lies before us here today. And I said to those of us who have been able to be successful, ask yourself this question. Is there a young man or a young woman in your community who reminds yourself of yourself, good or bad? Do you see a young lady or a young man in your church from a broken home who needs some help? Do you see an upcoming college graduate or a young entrepreneur who needs help in navigating through the bureaucratic maze? Do you see a young struggling lawyer who needs help? Step up and lend the brother or sister a hand. There is no shortage of need, but there is a shortage of help. The thoughts I have shared with you today may not work in every situation. What I think we can do is collectively share ideas that will result in common solutions. The dialogue is ongoing. However, our actions and our need is immediate. We are losing a part of our future to insidious, destructive, consuming, and in some instances, misbehaving of our youth. It may be your neighbor's child that commits the act, but it will be our world that absorbs the cost. Can we afford to pay the price? The clock is ticking. And let me say to these young people, I want to close my little talk here today using the words of Governor Wilder, the first African-American governor of a Commonwealth of Virginia. As he was being inaugurated a few years ago, he was speaking to the young people, but his words are applicable to all of us. And this is what he said. I want them to know that opposition can be lifted, that discrimination can be eliminated, that poverty need not be binding, that disabilities can be overcome, and that the offer of opportunities in a free society carries with it the requirements of hard work, the rejection of drugs and other false highs, and a willingness to work with others, whatever their race or national origin may be. Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay.
Today at the City Club of Cleveland, we're listening to a Friday forum featuring Fred Gray Sr., noted civil rights attorney and author. We will return to our speaker in a minute for our traditional City Club question and answer period. We encourage you to formulate your questions now. Please remember to keep them brief. We remind you that members and guests alike are welcome to attend City Club forums, and we hope everybody listening and here today, if you're not a member, please join the City Club. And please visit our website to see a full schedule of our upcoming programs. We welcome all of you here and those listening to WCPN 90.3 FM, WCLV, WTAM, or one of the many radio stations across the country. Our television broadcast partner is WVIZ PBS, IdeaStream. Television broadcasts of the City Club are made possible by Cleveland State University and PNC. Our live webcast is supported by the University of Akron. In 2012, the City Club of Cleveland will turn 100 years old. We're planning a number of great events, and we will be actively soliciting support from the community through our campaign for a new century. We are pleased to welcome guests at tables hosted by Case Western Reserve School of Law and the Legal Aid Society. We thank you for joining us today. We're also pleased to welcome students who are here as part of the City Club student program. Participation of these students is made possible by a generous grant from the Jeffrey David Epstein Memorial Student Fund. With us today are students from John Adams High School and the Cleveland School of Architecture and Design. Will students please stand and be recognized? Now we'd like to return to our speaker for our traditional City Club question and answer period. We welcome questions from everyone, including guests. Holding the microphone today is City Club Program Director Carrie Miller. First question, please.
Mr. Gray, you spoke at great length about the United States Constitution, the Bill of Rights, civil rights. You have a great familiarity with that area. One part of the Constitution provides that no citizen shall be deprived of life or liberty or property without due process of law. And yet, about 2 weeks ago, an alleged terrorist in Yemen was killed by a U.S. maneuvered drone. And to what extent do you think that represents a violation of our Constitution? And to what extent do you think it might have any effect upon our effort to bring democracy to all parts of the world?
Well, I think that the incident you're referring to is an incident that did not occur in the United States, while it was an incident that the government of the United States was involved in. I believe, and I'll have to yield to these academians and to particularly these constitutional lawyers, I think our Constitution really applies basically to activities which occurs in the country, while it does also govern the conduct of our citizens, period. I can understand our concern, and it may very well be that that's a matter that the whole business of foreign policy is something that the average layman is not really familiar with and don't know all of the ramifications and don't know all the details with respect to the terrorism. We do know that a great deal of terrorism that has resulted in damage to this country has resulted in some foreign countries. I may not have answered your question, but I think that's probably the best I can do with it.
Mr. Gray, I've enjoyed your presentation. I'd like to ask you to compare or try to demonstrate the relationship between policy application and cultural acceptance. I think it's kind of where we have the rub in this country, where we have these civil rights laws and policies, but we have this culture that seems to constantly combat, the acceptance of culture, different races, and tolerance.
I'm not sure that I'm following you completely.
Well, basically,
give me an example of what you're talking about.
Well, how about with civil rights laws? We've passed the Civil Rights. We had the Civil Rights Act, right?
Yes.
And now we're in a situation where the country, at least in policy and legislation and law on paper, we have these laws, but there's a culture of not accepting these laws. And I believe that this has been, over a period of time, what we fight more than just the creation of these policies.
Yeah. Well, I certainly think that the matter, we had in this country discrimination and segregation that was sanctioned by law. And when I started out, they would tell me outright that I'm doing it, and I'm doing it because of your race, and the law says it, so I'm abiding by it. We were able to change those laws. Now, our Constitution still prohibits that, but you still have persons, whether you call it culture or anything else. The most disappointing thing to me, as a result of my 55 years of practice, I thought that when the power structure, and I'm talking about, for the most part, the white power structure, would see that African Americans could perform as efficiently as they could if given an opportunity, that it would actually change the hearts and minds of individuals. But the hearts and minds of some people have not changed. And I don't know whether you call it culture or whatever you want to call it. The point is that until such time as people really, and a lot of it is individual, if we can keep the government sanction aspect of it and get the government to do the things it should do, then that should be an encouragement to individuals to be able to accept individuals on the basis of who they are as distinguished from what their ethnic background might be. Now, I may not have answered your question, but that's it.
My name is Orlando Hobson. I represent John Adams High School. My question is, how can today's youth make a contribution to social change as the 15-year-old young lady did?
How can
youth today make contributions to social change?
Let me, I've given you two examples of what youth have done. One was what Claudette Carbon did. Now, nobody told Claudette, and Claudette didn't have any idea what was going to happen to her after she was arrested. But she knew that she was sitting in a seat that she had sat in before, and she just felt it was wrong for her to give up her seat. So that act, while in and of itself, she didn't do it intending to create a problem. She just felt that she was right. She'd been taught these courses and civic courses and everything else about equality. So I think that was one. Then you had the college students who participated in, who started the sit-in demonstrations at AT&T. As a result of what they did, Congress ended up passing the Public Accommodation Act that did away with all the laws that dealt with segregation and public accommodations. I cannot, and I tell young people this all the time, and old ones too, no one told me when I went back home what I should do in order to do away with segregation that I found. I saw a problem. I made up in my mind, I thought it was wrong, then the first thing I decided to do was to get myself prepared so I would be able to do something. So let me finally conclude by saying I think what you can do, and this is old-fashioned, and it may be the ministerial aspect in me, but my mother told her 5 children, and she lost her husband when her youngest one, and that was me, was 2. She said, you can be anything you want to be. So now if you want to make a contribution, you can make it. But there are 3 things you need to do. 1, keep Christ first in your life. 2, stay in school and get a good education. And 3, stay out of trouble. Now, those are old-fashioned, simple Southern remedies, but it worked good for me. I tried to instill it in my children, and they've done pretty good. And hopefully, they are trying to instill it in theirs. So no one is going to be able to give you on a platter everything you need to do. But if you prepare yourself, then as time passes, you'll see opportunities. You'll take advantage of those opportunities, and you don't know what will happen. I didn't know what was going to happen when I started out. But if you take a step and get yourself prepared, somebody out there will help you, and you don't know what might happen.
Good to see you today. Welcome back to Cleveland.
Thank you.
Voting rights. Could you give us some history of what happened in Alabama when you were a young attorney regarding people expanding voting rights in Alabama? And if you could also comment, there's some states in the Union that are restricting voting rights now, as, for example, what the governor here has proposed to do with regard to shortening the time to allow people to vote, voter ID cards, etc. Thank you.
Yeah, I think you've done it. Actually, initially, they simply wouldn't let black people vote in most of these southern states. And we had to ultimately get any number of laws passed, and even in my home county now of Macon, when the court would order the board of registrars to register blacks in the 50s and 60s, the members of the board of registrars, rather than, after they register the white people, rather than to register the black ones, they resign. So you have no vote at all. So all of those things, of course, then you come up with federal registrars who were able to get people registered. But now, I think it shows that the people who are concerned about voter ID and shortening the time to make it more difficult so that minorities can have an effective voice, what they have done, they've seen that we've been able to go ahead and get our people registered, get them involved in the process. Now, another method is being used to deny them the right to vote, and they'll do it any way they can. But we simply will have to take advantage of those opportunities and knock the ones down that we can, not let them stop us. Even though it is a little more difficult, it is not nearly as difficult as what we had to do before. Let's go ahead and do what we need to do, get our people to be able to do what the laws say, and get them to the polls and be sure they vote properly when they get there.
Okay. Hi, I'm Autumn Jefferson. I attend the Cleveland School of Architecture and Design. This morning, my government teacher informed me that some states will try to not abide by the affirmative action laws, where they're not required to, hire the stated quota of minorities. Now, does that seem like that's setting us back in our steps a little bit to reach our goal of racial equality?
One of the, one thing about this country, we always can come up with terms that we describe things. And of course, quotas was one, affirmative action was one, and it gets to be bad terms. I don't care what you call it. What we need to do is to come up with a plan that will do away with, one, discrimination, two, the vestiges of the effect of past discrimination. Call it whatever you want. You don't have to call it affirmative action. And folks don't like quotas. That's a bad name. But we're going to have some kind of plan that works. You give it a name, but come up with a plan so that people can be equally considered for employment, considering the fact that some of them had to come along or much farther from under to get up to level before they can get on top. And I think all those proper considerations should be given, but it should be a plan that works. Let me just mention one other thing that I think is very important in this whole civil rights field. We have now at least two generations, these young people and their parents, for the most part, who know very little about civil rights, very little about the history. That's why it is important that those of us who are involved in civil rights need to write. It's important that it be included in our history that's being taught to these children. And I have devoted the last 12 years to developing in Tuskegee a history museum that tells a story not just about black people, but it tells the contribution that Native Americans have made, that European Americans have made, that African Americans have made in the area where we live, in and around East Alabama in Macon County. The idea being, if they can see where each one of us have made contributions, and we have made a tremendous amount of progress from when slaves landed here in 1607, then whatever our problems are now, we'll be able to help. Then the second thing the museum does, it serves as a permanent memorial for those men in the Tuskegee syphilis study. 623 of them, and a lot of those people had migrated to the Cleveland area, and they said after I was able to sell their lawsuit and get President Clinton to make an apology, that they wanted a permanent memorial in Tuskegee so that people could come and see and read about the contributions they made. I promised those men, all of them are dead now. And then third, there's so much history in many of these cases that they read about that I have handled that came out of central Alabama. So we want you to come by and see the Tuskegee Human and Civil Rights Multicultural Center. It's a small, nice museum. I have been devoting the last 12 years raising funds to support it. I want you to come down and see it. And if you want some more information about it afterwards, you see me when we finish, and I'll be happy to share it with you. Any other questions?
Good afternoon, Mr. Gray. My name is Neil. I enjoyed listening to your inspiring speech. A question was asked on the floor today about constitutional rights of a terrorist in a foreign country. Recently, the Memphis three white gentlemen, have been incarcerated for 18 years since they were teenagers. They have been released because of DNA exoneration. About 10 to 14 days ago, if I have the name correct, Troy Davis was executed, and a jury of law convicted him in 1989. 7 of those 9 jurors recanted their testimony. From a constitutional point of view and a civil rights point of view, what is your opinion of that execution, and were his rights violated?
Well, of course, and my view on that issue, the matter of capital punishment, you may consider it bias and prejudice. I personally do not believe in capital punishment because I don't think that it doesn't deter anybody. People still go out and do things. And so the purpose that is primarily designed to eliminate and just to take another person's life because they took someone's life, in my opinion, is not a good reason to do it. But, you know, capital punishment isn't anything that just started. We've had capital punishment in this country all these years, and the Supreme Court has been wrestling with it over these years. At one time, there was a moratorium on it for, 5 or 6 years, or maybe longer. So at some point along the way, we would hope that this nation would believe that there is some other way of being able to solve these bad crimes without necessarily having to take another life to do it. Now, that may not be answering your question, but it's about all I can do with capital punishment.
Mr. Gray, I want to thank you for your presentation today. I also want to thank the City Club for bringing you here. I'm a fellow Alabamian, about your generation. I'm 75. I think you're a couple of years older than me. But many of the experiences that you've had, I have. My family came from Alabama to Ohio in 1945. I was 9 years old. I've got 2 daughters. One is a congressperson and one is a council person. When I was growing up, I read an autobiography by Abraham Lincoln. He said, I will study and prepare myself, and when my chance comes, I'll be ready. My 3 favorite all-time heroes is Jesus Christ. I'm a preacher. Abraham Lincoln. I ran for politics. I haven't won anything, but I got 2 elected daughters. And also, Joe Lewis was my other one. I'm a former Golden Glove boxing champion. My statement is this. I've attended the Fred Gray African American Museum in Tuskegee. I plan to go back down in a couple of months. And I think this is the type of presentation that I think we all need to hear. My hair is about Sylvia's heels. But we don't get enough of this. These young people especially don't hear this. And the only way to get it is to sit at the knee of people like Fred Gray, not Bob Saffold. And I'm looking forward to coming back again. And you've done a great work and great service to all of us. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Gray, thank you also for coming to Cleveland. I'm Colleen Cotter. I'm with the Legal Aid Society, and we actually are proud to host John Lewis in a couple of weeks for an event here. Wow. So it's a great Civil Rights Month here in Cleveland. My question is, when you were talking about the need for more people to fully understand the Civil Rights Movement, as I read John Lewis's memoirs and other things, I'm struck by the sacrifice that you and others were willing to make, putting your careers on the line, putting your lives on the line, putting your families at risk, and you were willing to stand up to power in order to challenge the injustice. And I wonder if you have any thoughts about how we can recapture some of that and what it was that motivated you and made you willing to do that.
I think I have discussed with you earlier what motivated me. But I think a lot of this is going to have to start with the individual. You have a very nice group, a group of legal aids. You're out helping people. And when I was the 126th president of the Alabama State Bar Association, the same association that tried to get me disbarred during the Civil Rights Movement, I had a theme for the bar year was lawyers run to service. And the greatest thing that I see every day is when I can see that I have done something that has helped somebody to obtain some rights or enjoy some benefits that but for my helping them, they would not have done it. But I think it's going to have to start with individuals. I wish and the problems of racism and the disparity that exists between the races is so great in this country. I wish there was something that we could just have a magic wand and wave and it'll all be over. But it doesn't work that way. It's going to take some hard work, sometime with individuals, brainstorming, talking about things, and then coming up with some ideas, because your ideas about solving these problems are just as good as somebody else like SNCC or CORE who came up with the ideas about the sit-ins and the demonstrations. And it doesn't necessarily have to be that, but it'll be something that you feel will work, and try it. And you can't tell, something might happen and it may work.
Today at the City Club of Cleveland, we've been listening to Fred Gray Sr., noted attorney and author. Thank you, Mr. Gray. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. This forum is now adjourned.
For information on upcoming speakers or for podcasts of the City Club, go to cityclub.org.